Sex crimes have long been the bread and butter of news organizations, but the old he said, she said reporting of the past has been replaced in some circles by an approach that essentially vilifies rather than explains. A Boston Globe story this week said Worcester Polytechnic Institute partly blamed a rape victim for her assault because she had exercised poor judgment.
Outrage on campus at Worcester Polytech.
It's a proposition that didn't set well with the media.
That case making a lot of people very angry.
Another rape case this week also had the media taking sides.
Growing anger over a college sex assault case.
A judge in California sentenced a former Stanford University swimming star to 6 months in jail after his conviction for sexual assault. The prosecution had sought 6 years. The victim's lengthy impact statement was posted by BuzzFeed, and on CNN, an emotional Ashley Banfield read it in its entirety.
My mom had to hold me. Because I could no longer stand up.
And there are calls for heads on a platter.
This judge, Aaron Persky, I believe, should be removed.
Of course, vilifying judges has a long history.
You know, you're talking about a 19-year-old kid.
That's former Massachusetts Superior Court Judge Maria Lopez speaking on Greater Boston last night. She also was vilified back in 2003 for giving a lenient sentence to a transgender woman who lured a boy into a sex act. Now, Lopez is defending the California judge.
This is a witch hunt, and that the public and the media should not jump on judges without knowing the nuances of what really happened in the courtroom.
That will be the day. First of all, I think nuance is really critical in these rape and sexual assault cases. For instance, the WPI. And I know headlines are written by people other than the news reporters, but twice that the headline in the Globe said WPI partly blames. Well, it was the attorneys for AIG that were partly blaming the woman, not
the insurance company?
The insurance company. And the president of the institution came out and clarified that, but it was a little late because the headline was very disturbing, and that's really what a lot of people were reacting to. And secondly, I just don't think it's the role of the media to be the outrage. Let the people be the outrage. When Maria Lopez, who's a friend of mine, I've said that for many, many years, when she first gave that very lenient sentence to Ebony Horton in that case, the media camped out on her lawn. She was essentially run out of town, which is a favorite pastime here in Boston anyway. But if there was some outrage, let it play out, but not. If the media took a lead role in that. There was a radio station broadcasting from her front lawn.
I remember that well, and I worked for many years for her husband, Stephen Mindich, at the Boston Phoenix. These two rape cases that are in the news right now come at a very interesting time, because there's a sense, I think, that the whole notion of campus sexual assault has been overblown. And here you have two pretty harrowing cases of young women being subjected to sexual assault in the not necessarily on campus, but within the context of university life. I think that some of the studies may have some flaws, but nevertheless, I think it's very clear to anybody who works on college campuses that it's a very, very real problem. And I think that drove it home, entirely aside from whether the media have overdone the outrage. I think it's important that a light be shown on this after things that have gone wrong, like the Rolling Stone story and some other things.
And the outrage in particular at the judge and the father and the boy, the outrage was really fomented, I think. It might have been there anyway, but it was fomented.
Well, that may not be the media's role, but nevertheless, there are just some facts to this case that are hard to overlook. Not only did the prosecution seek 6 years, but he could have gotten 14 years, and now he's up for, 6 months for what by all accounts was a pretty awful, violent assault.
That's what the probation department recommended.
It's very, very difficult to understand what happened here, and maybe the judge has a story to tell. We haven't heard
he does.
it.
And he should talk.
And he should talk.
Yeah.
I agree.
I find, I guess I'm troubled by putting these two cases together. I think they're very, very different in First, the allegation involving the student from WPI. The assaulter was was a security guard apparently in the apartment where WPI has leased space there. He has been convicted. He has apparently been sentenced to prison for 20 years, and so the case is, should WPI have had some responsibility? Were they culpable that they didn't do background checks? Very, very different kind of a case than I think what happened out in Stanford.
Yeah, except there's a lawsuit involved because,
well, there's a lawsuit, but it's over damages, and so there's absolutely what happened to the rapist in this case. Perfectly appropriate. 20 years in prison, no sympathy for that person, and much sympathy for the victim. But WPI is in a situation where it has to defend whether it was culpable for not protecting her somewhat. Very different situation. I think in my sense is I don't think that the media has overstepped in the Stanford case at all, given the fact that the prosecution was asking for such a significant situation. And I think
the probation department recommended 6 months.
But there's a huge difference between what was possible to get for that crime, what the prosecution was seeking, and 6 months. And I think the fact that there is now a big question about that is legitimate. Now, Ashley Banfield going on camera, being emotional and crying, that would always trouble me a little bit for a journalist to do that.
And victim statements aren't admissible as court evidence anyway, so she was kind of like...
Yeah.
I mean, I think what made the Stanford case bigger beyond the sentencing, I mean, was the victim's letter. It was so powerful, and too often you don't hear from the victim. And I think the media, I mean, we like to cover sexual assaults because we don't. I mean, it's a hot, sexy topic, unfortunately. But also in this case, we heard from the victim, and she wrote. I mean, I listened. I thought Ashley went a little overboard in her presentation, but if you listen to the letter and you read the letter, you heard for the first time what happens to a rape victim, and you don't hear that. You don't hear them. We don't even know who she is. So I thought that's why it became such a big story.
Well, it became such a big story because the judge did speak. He said to give him more than 6 months would be unfair to him. So he spoke all right, and that's where the outrage came from. Not from the journalists. We can argue about the Ashley Banfield. I think I may go with where Tom is and maybe even where you are about that. But let me just say that outrage bubbled up. 1 million signatures led by a women's advocacy group to get that guy off the bench. Now, that's people mad. That's not journalists mad. And they're right to reflect what it said. If you don't reflect that the father wrote he's being persecuted, his son, for 20 minutes of action, that stirred a lot of outrage. And to your point, her statement really gave stomach-churning graphic details of what the situation was. And let me remind you, this woman had witnesses, and this is what she had to go through. Oh yeah, there's outrage across the board, and it's appropriate. Now, if you want to say, Ashley Banfield, should you have read the letter? Okay, I can have a discussion about that from a journalistic standpoint. I personally thought it was an interesting way of getting into the conversation. She had other guests on. We could look at her guests and say, did she have somebody that question or raise questions like you did? Maybe that's the way she should have gone with that. I don't know. But I think overall that the outrage was really reflected of the public and not us driving it. There were some hyped headlines, absolutely.
I don't want to keep going on this, but I didn't hear anybody try to justify anything that either the father or the judge said. Nobody.
Well, who would justify the father?
Probably a lot.
Somebody saying 20 minutes of action, Emily? That the guy should not be, should not get any punishment.
Definitely a poor choice of words.
You think? You think?
Well, I mean, also, I think the outrage was was the idea that there was only one victim here, and it was the Stanford swimmer. And in her letter, she laid out that I'm a victim too.
Exactly.
Regardless of, you have to acknowledge that. And in her letter, she talked about how I would have been happy with a settlement. I just wanted you to acknowledge that there was a criminal act here, and what happened happened with the trial, it sounded like he doesn't acknowledge that. He said, I was drunk and you
By
were
the way,
drunk.
the judge is a Stanford alum, let's just say.